Drowned Ghost. The story happened around 1994, 1995, though I don't remember the exact year. I come from the central region of Vietnam, where the fierce Lao winds and storms are common, and so are the eerie stories like the ones from this land. One day in September it was raining heavily, and my grandfather went fishing with his net. He went to his usual spot and did everything as usual. But that day was peculiar. Despite the heavy rain, he couldn't catch any fish, which was unusual because fish were usually abundant in such weather. He found it strange and decided to go home. Suddenly, he saw a person on a nearby bridge slowly approaching him. My grandfather asked, "Where are you going in this rain?" The man replied, "I was herding ducks, but it's raining too hard. Can you help me roll up my pants? They're getting in the way." My grandfather kindly agreed and started rolling up the man's pants. However, as soon as he lifted the pants, he noticed the man's legs were extremely slimy, and as he rolled them up further, the flesh on the legs started falling off. With his experience, my grandfather realized he was dealing with something supernatural, a drowned ghost trying to drag someone along. At that moment, if my grandfather had tried to run away, he would have been easily dragged down into the river. He did something according to his knowledge. He took a little salt from his pocket, rubbed it on his hands, and then rubbed it on the man's legs. Instantly, the man disappeared. My grandfather went home right away and never returned to that spot to fish again. According to the beliefs in my hometown, once a ghost has targeted you, it will eventually take you. The best precaution is to avoid the place where you had the encounter. The Earth House. This story happened almost 20 years ago. At that time, my mother hadn't given birth to me yet, and our family was very poor. We were given a piece of land by our grandparents to build a house. Because we were still very poor, we built a simple earth house just enough to shield us from the rain and sun. From this point, the eerie story in the earth house began. My father was a man who often went into the forest to cut trees, essentially a logger. He was used to the forest, so wild animals or ghosts were normal to him. My father recounted. Once, while sleeping at home, he felt someone climbing onto him and pressing him down late at night. He was startled and tried to open his eyes but couldn't. In his mind, he knew he was being attacked by a ghost, so he mustered all his strength to break free from the ghostly grip. After struggling for a while, he felt lighter and woke up to find no one there. However, strangely enough, there were clear imprints of hands squeezing his arms. The second story also took place in that old house. One night, my mother heard the clattering of pans, bowls, and pots, as if something was shaking them. She thought it was probably mice, so she got up and went to the kitchen, but the noises stopped. When everything returned to normal, she went back to bed. A while later, she heard another sound, but this time it wasn't from the kitchen. It was the sound of a baby laughing and playing in the house. When she opened her eyes, she was terrified. Near the bed was a woman holding a baby, floating in the air, with a pale face looking at her and seemingly smiling. My mother could only scream loudly to wake my father. My father woke up and asked what was wrong. My mother then told him the whole story, and he reassured her. Sometime later, when my mother gave birth to me, they bought a more decent house nearby and didn't encounter ghosts anymore. When my father asked my grandmother, she said that when she was young, it seemed that the land our house was on had a neighbor's child buried there because both mother and child had died from childbirth complications. At this point, my father got goosebumps. Night Walker. A middle-aged man, drunk and staggering, was making his way home. His body swayed as he walked along a deserted road, humming and mumbling incoherently. By chance, he saw a little girl sitting and scribbling on the ground with a stick. He stumbled closer and asked, "Hey, little girl, what are you doing out here alone at night?" The little girl looked up at him, a mysterious smile on her face, but her eyes were filled with tears. What was frightening was that her eyes were very deep, and her eye sockets were dark and hollow. "I'm digging the ground with this stick to bury someone. My father. He abandoned my mother and me, causing my mother to miscarry, but now he's dead." The drunk man thought that her family must be too poor to afford a proper burial, so he didn't care much. As he turned to leave, he accidentally tripped over a stick on the ground, fell, and hit his head on a large rock, dying instantly. His body was quickly covered by mud and dirt, forming what looked like a grave. In the quiet, deserted night, the eerie voice of the little girl echoed along with her sinister laughter. The bus ride to school. As usual, I sat on the school bus, lost in the music playing in my ears, paying little attention to the other students on board. At one of the stops, I suddenly looked around, noticing the small house where Tommy lived, the bus halting there. A hand waved from inside the house, signaling the driver to continue without picking anyone up. Maybe he's sick, I thought briefly. At the end of the day, I returned home to spend time with my family. That evening, I watched the local news channel, and what I heard left me utterly shocked. Tommy's entire family had been murdered by an unknown suspect on that very day. After hearing this news, I quietly retired to my room and fell asleep. The next day, I boarded the bus to school again. Our bus still passed by Tommy's house, as the driver was unaware of the tragic events that had unfolded there the previous day. As I prepared to stand up to explain to the driver what had happened, an image ingrained in my memory forever emerged. A faint hand gliding through the bus window, waving to signal the driver to keep going, just like the day before. Buried alive. There is a tale from the past about a maid who was incredibly beautiful and worked for a wealthy family. Her beauty captivated the husband, who couldn't take his eyes off her. Out of jealousy, the wife sent the maid away to work in a distant place, hoping she would never return. However, upon completing her task, the maid did return. This enraged the wife, who ordered her servants to remove all the maid's fingernails, cut off all her hair and eyelashes, and even cut her mouth, leaving her with the same charming smile stretched to her ears. They forcefully pulled out all her teeth and burnt her with hot metal. They buried her alive in one of the walls of the house, leaving only a small air hole. One night, while lying in bed with her husband, the wife felt extremely agitated and uneasy. She couldn't sleep and felt as though someone was watching her, so she dared not move. Trembling with fear, she pulled the sheepskin blanket over her head and closed her eyes, then reached out to hold her husband's hand to reassure herself. But then, she realized that the hand she was holding was very soft, sticky with some kind of foul-smelling liquid, and most terrifyingly, it had no fingernails at all.